The saloon was alive with smoke, piano notes, and the rough laughter of men who had long forgotten gentleness. Silas Reed leaned against the bar, eyes on the bottles he'd polished so many times they shone like mirrors. He carried himself like stone, tall, quiet, and unbending. Years of loss had carved that into him. People said he had sworn off love, and they were right. Since the grave had taken his wife, nothing had stirred his heart except the work of keeping his saloon standing on this hard frontier. That night, as the lamp flames flickered low and the crowd grew restless, the swinging doors creaked open. A hush rippled through the room like the sound of wind crossing dry grass. Every card game paused, every glass lowered. For stepping into that den of whiskey and dice was Naomi Brooks, the preacher's daughter. Her dress was plain, patched neatly, by careful hands, but the way she carried herself made even gamblers sit straighter. Her eyes were steady, though she had to feel the heat of the stares pressing on her. Some men smirked, some whispered, and others shook their heads as if judgment itself had walked in behind her. Silas frowned. He had seen many kinds of trouble enter through those doors. Drunk ranchers, desperate miners, slick talkers with knives hidden in their boots. But this? A young woman from the church stepping boldly into his saloon? That was the kind of trouble no whiskey could drown. She walked right up to him, her hands clasped before her, as if she were steadying herself for a sermon. "Mr. Reed," she said, voice clear, carrying across the smoky room. "I came to ask for work." The room erupted in low laughter, disbelief rolling like thunder. "Work?" Silas asked, his voice rough from years of smoke and silence. "As a singer," she answered, her chin lifted, showing the stubborn line of someone who would not beg, though her voice trembled at the edges. "I can keep a tune, I can draw a crowd, and I need the money." The whispers grew sharper. "The preacher's girl wants to sing in a saloon?" One man muttered loud enough for all to hear. "Her pa will string her up by dawn." Another chuckled, but Silas didn't laugh. He studied her, searching for the weakness in her eyes, the shame that might make her turn and leave. Yet there was none. Only quiet fire, steady as the lamp burning between them. "You know what this means," he said, voice low so only she could hear. "This town will tear your name apart. You won't be the preacher's daughter anymore, you'll be the saloon girl." Naomi's breath hitched, but she did not step back. "I know," she whispered, "but my mother is ill, and the medicine costs more than we have. If I do nothing, I lose her. If I work here, at least I have a chance." The weight of her words struck him harder than any whiskey burn. For a moment, Silas saw not just the preacher's daughter, but a young woman pressed against the wall of survival. He had lived that kind of desperation. Behind them, the piano man tapped a careless chord, breaking the silence. The crowd waited, eager for Silas to turn her away, to restore the world they knew. Instead, he said, "Sing something. Let's hear if your voice is worth all this trouble." A hush settled once more. Naomi's lips parted and she began softly. The first note trembled, but as it rose, it steadied, carrying like clear water over stones. A voice not trained by schools, but carved by faith and hardship, rang through the room. The gamblers stilled. The drinkers forgot their glasses. Even Silas, who had sworn nothing could stir him again, felt something loosen in his chest. When she finished, no one dared laugh. Silas looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "You've got the job." The saloon exhaled, but the trouble had only just begun. The preacher's house stood at the edge of town, its wooden porch weathered by wind and rain. That night, the door slammed hard enough to rattle the walls. Reverend Josiah Brooks paced the room like a storm trapped inside four boards, his fists clenched. Word had reached him faster than wildfire. His daughter had stepped into Silas Reed's saloon. His wife, pale and coughing on the small bed in the corner, tried to speak. "Josiah," but the Reverend's face burned with shame. "A saloon? My daughter singing for drunkards?" His voice cracked through the room. "She has dishonored us, dishonored the Lord. She'll come home, or she will not be my child." Meanwhile, Naomi walked back through the dust-dark streets, her heart pounding, though her face stayed calm. She had won her place, but she knew the cost. Each lamp she passed felt like an eye watching her, whispering. By dawn, everyone would know. The next evening, Silas's saloon was full. Word of the preacher's daughter on stage had drawn more men than whiskey ever had. She stood before them, hands tight around the microphone stand, waiting for the piano to strike. Her voice rose, steadily this time, and the crowd leaned in, not out of mockery, but fascination. In the shadows, Silas watched carefully. He'd seen greed, anger, and envy in many forms, but what flickered in the men's faces was something new, something like respect. Yet respect from drunkards was still a dangerous thing. When she finished her song, applause thundered through the room. Naomi smiled faintly, but her eyes searched for her father in the crowd. He wasn't there, but his absence felt heavier than his presence. Later, when the noise had died down and the last drunk had stumbled into the street, Silas found Naomi at the bar, folding her pay carefully into a cloth purse. "You handled yourself well," he said. His voice was gruff, but his eyes held something softer. She looked up at him. "Thank you for giving me the chance. My father won't see it that way." "He'll come," Silas said quietly, "and he won't be kind." Naomi nodded. She already knew. True enough, the next morning the preacher himself strode into the saloon, robe still dusted from the pulpit. The doors banged against the walls as he entered. The room was empty, save for Silas wiping down the bar and Naomi, who stood tall, waiting. "Come home," Reverend Brooks commanded. His voice shook with anger, but beneath it there was something like fear. "I can't," Naomi said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm helping Mother. You know the medicine costs more than—" "You shame us all," the preacher roared. "You shame your name, your church, your God." Silas stepped forward, slow and deliberate. His broad frame cast a shadow across the wooden floor. "Reverend," he said in a tone that carried warning, "your daughter asked for honest work. She earned it. No one forced her here." The preacher's eyes burned into Silas as though the saloon owner himself had stolen her innocence. "You," he spat, "you've corrupted her. This is your doing." Naomi's throat tightened, but she did not step back. "No, Father," she said, tears shining in her eyes. "I chose this. I walked in on my own." The silence after her words was heavier than any sermon. The Reverend trembled with fury, but Silas did not flinch, and Naomi did not bow her head. At last the preacher turned and stormed out, his boots striking the floor like gunfire. Naomi gripped the edge of the bar, her knuckles white. "He'll never forgive me," she whispered. Silas looked at her, his face unreadable. Sometimes forgiveness is slower than survival. Outside, the town had already begun to talk, and their words would not be kind. By the end of that week, the whole town was buzzing. At the blacksmith's forge, at the general store, even on the church steps, people whispered about the preacher's daughter singing in a saloon. Some called her bold. Others called her fallen, but no one stayed silent. The saloon, once just a place for drink and dice, is now filled every night. Cowboys rode in from nearby ranches just to hear the voice that stirred the town to gossip. Naomi stood on stage, her songs weaving through smoke and noise, lifting the room into something almost holy. But not everyone liked it. The grocer's wife crossed the street to avoid her. Mothers pulled their children close when she passed. And worse, some men, drunk and careless, started calling her the Saloon angel, with laughter that cut like knives. One night, after her song, Naomi slipped off stage and sat near the back, her face pale. Silas noticed and walked over. "You're shaking," he said. She lifted her eyes, fighting tears. "It's not the singing. It's them. Their stares, their whispers. I can feel the weight of it everywhere I go." Silas set a glass of water before her. "They talk because they've never seen someone stand against them. They'll talk louder before they quiet down." Naomi pressed the glass to her lips, her voice low. "And if they never quiet?" Silas looked at her for a long moment. "Then you keep standing." The days wore on and the preacher's sermons grew sharper. He warned from the pulpit that sin had entered the town, that even his own daughter had strayed into darkness. "Pray for her," he urged, "or she will be lost." But in the taverns the men laughed and wagered on how long she would last before breaking. The weight pressed on Silas too. The churchgoers began a boycott, vowing no good Christian would step inside his saloon. The supplies he ordered took longer to arrive. Even the sheriff hinted that trouble might follow if he kept giving the girl work. One evening, as Naomi practiced softly with the piano man before the doors opened, she paused and turned to Silas. "If this ruins your business, I'll leave," she said. Silas shook his head. "You don't run just because the town's afraid of its own shadow." Naomi's voice trembled. "It's more than shadows. My father said if I keep on, he'll cut me off for good. He'll say I'm no daughter of his." Silas leaned on the bar, his eyes narrowing. "And what will you do if he means it?" For a moment, Naomi's composure broke. "I don't know," she whispered. "He's my father, but I can't let Mother waste away because he won't face the truth." The piano keys struck a sad chord hanging in the air. Silas turned away, hiding the way her words had struck something buried deep in him. He remembered the nights after his wife died, when the whole town looked at him with pity and judgment, whispering that a man like him should never have tried to keep something pure. He had sworn off love then, sworn off the risk of needing anyone. But Naomi Brooks, standing in his saloon with her voice steady and her heart breaking, unsettled that vow like a storm unsettling old ground. That night, as Naomi sang again, a group of men stood outside the saloon doors, their voices loud with mockery. "The preacher's girl," one shouted, "singing for coins like any other dance hall doll." The words carried inside, striking Naomi mid-song. Her throat tightened, but she finished, every note harder than steel. When she stepped off the stage, Silas caught her arm. "You held them off," he said. "That takes more courage than most men in this town." Naomi looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "But how long can courage stand against hate?" Silas had no answer. He only knew that the battle had truly begun. The night air outside the saloon carried a chill, though summer still lingered. Naomi pulled her shawl tighter as she walked home, her steps slow on the dirt road. Behind her, Silas followed at a distance, making sure she reached her door without trouble. He told himself it was just good sense, nothing more. But the truth was he couldn't shake the worry. From the window of the preacher's house a lamp flickered. When Naomi slipped inside, she found her father gone, but her mother awake, sitting up weakly in bed. "Naomi," her mother whispered, reaching out. "I heard you sing." "Some of the women told me. They meant it as shame, but to me it sounded like hope. Don't let their tongues break you." Naomi knelt, pressing her mother's frail hand to her lips. "I'm only trying to help. But Father, he'll never forgive me." Her mother's cough shook her thin frame. "Your father carries pride heavier than the Bible he holds. But pride doesn't pay debts." Naomi stilled, her head rising. "Debts?" Her mother's lips parted as if she had said too much. Before Naomi could ask again, another fit of coughing stole her strength. Naomi fetched water, her heart racing with questions she had never thought to ask. The next day the tension thickened. Church bells rang, calling people not only to prayer but to judgment. Men whispered of the Reverend's anger, women of Naomi's stubbornness. Even children repeated cruel rhymes as she walked by. Inside the saloon, Silas watched her carry herself with dignity, though he could see the tremor in her hands when she lifted a glass of water. "They're circling you like wolves," he muttered when she came off stage that evening. Naomi smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed her weariness. "Wolves don't scare me. Hunger does. My mother needs medicine. I'll bear the rest." Silas wanted to say more, but he stopped himself. He had promised never to open his heart again, and yet every word she spoke chipped at the wall he had built. The following night, trouble walked straight into the saloon. A rival preacher, younger and fiery, stood in the doorway with a group of townsfolk at his back. His voice cut through the haze of smoke. "This place corrupts, and worse, it hides sin beneath a woman's song. Naomi Brooks, daughter of a man of God, turned into a spectacle by a man who knows no shame." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Naomi froze, her voice dying in her throat. Silas rose from behind the bar, his hand steady as he wiped it clean with a rag. His eyes were cold as iron. "You've had your sermon, preacher. But in here she sings by choice. Nobody owns her voice, not even you," the young preacher sneered. "Choice? A woman misled by a saloon keeper is no more free than a bird in a cage. Her father's debts, his disgrace, they weigh on her, and you profit from it." Naomi's breath caught. Debts. The word stabbed through her like a knife. The rival preacher's words struck deep in the room, planting doubt. Men glanced at each other, wondering if Naomi was nothing more than a pawn in a larger shame. Naomi's legs trembled, but she steadied herself. Her eyes lifted to Silas's. For the first time she felt the walls closing in, and she knew the truth could not stay hidden much longer. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and silence wrapped the room, Naomi sat with Silas near the empty stage. The lamplight threw soft shadows across their faces. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, her voice low. "Something about why I came here. If I keep it secret, it'll crush me, and if I speak it, it might crush us both." Silas's gaze was steady, waiting. Naomi's hands twisted in her lap, her heart pounding against her ribs. "My father," she whispered, "is drowning in debt. I took this job to pay it, even if it means he'll hate me forever." The words hung heavy in the smoke-filled room. For the first time, Silas saw her not as the preacher's daughter, not as a singer, but as someone carrying a weight too large for her shoulders alone. And he knew this truth would tear the town apart. The silence between them stretched long after Naomi's confession. The lamps hissed. The piano strings creaked in the night air, but neither spoke for a while. Silas leaned back against the bar, his face unreadable. "So that's the truth," he finally said, his voice low. "Your father, the mighty preacher, he's not half as righteous as he looks." Naomi's eyes filled with shame. "Don't speak against him," she pleaded. "Yes, he's proud. Yes, he's blinded by his own anger. But the debts are real. Men will come knocking if they're not paid. He'll lose everything, the church, the house, maybe even our land." Silas studied her closely. "And you stepped into this place, into the fire of their judgment, just to keep him standing." Naomi's lips trembled, but she held his gaze. If the town knew, if they found out the preacher of all men was drowning in debt, it would destroy him. "I can't let that happen. Not while Mother still needs his name clean, his roof steady over her." Silas ran a hand over his jaw, the weight of her words pressing deep. He had thought she was stubborn, even reckless. But now he saw something else, sacrifice. A quiet strength that dared to suffer so others could survive. "You've more grit than half the men I know," he said at last. Naomi gave a small, bitter laugh. "Grit doesn't stop tongues from wagging. Every night I sing, they say I'm ruined. But if I quit, the debts stay and my mother wastes away. Tell me, Mr. Reed, which ruin is worse?" Silas had no answer. He only felt the wall around his heart shift again, bricks loosening where he thought they were set forever. The next evening, Naomi sang with more fire than before. Her voice climbed through the rafters, breaking past shame and judgment. The crowd leaned in, some with awe, others with envy, but none could deny the power in her song. Even men who had mocked her fell silent, their cups forgotten in their hands. When the last note faded, Silas saw something new in her eyes, a steel that came from truth spoken aloud. But the truth was dangerous in a town built on appearances. Outside the saloon that night, a knot of townsfolk gathered in the dark, whispering. The rival preacher stood among them, his words sharp as a blade. Reed uses her voice to line his pockets. And the preacher's house? It's sinking because of sin. Can't you see? She sings for shame, not salvation. The whispers turned into mutters, the mutters into anger. By the time dawn broke, talk of running Naomi out of the saloon spread across porches and store counters. Naomi felt it. When she walked down Main Street, mothers turned their backs. Shopkeepers tightened their mouths. A boy threw a stone at her skirt, shouting, "Saloon girl!" She kept her head high, though her heart cracked. That night, when Silas paid her wages, she held the coins for a long moment before tucking them away. "This is the first payment for the debt," she said softly. "It may take years, but I'll carry it. He'll never know. It'll be my burden, not his." Silas's chest tightened at her words. He saw himself reflected in her sacrifice, saw the ghost of his late wife who had once carried weight for him in silence. He thought he had buried all feelings with her. Yet here was Naomi, stirring the ashes back into flame. He wanted to tell her not to fight alone. He wanted to reach out, to let her know she wasn't standing in that storm by herself. But the vow he had made, the vow never to love again, held his hand still, and so he only said, "The town won't stay quiet. If the debt comes to light, it'll fall on all of us." Naomi's voice steadied. "Then I'll take the blame. I chose this path, not you." For the first time, Silas wished she hadn't, because he knew the fight ahead would demand more than even her courage could bear. The weeks that followed were heavy with tension. The saloon had never seen such crowds, yet outside its doors the town's disapproval thickened like storm clouds. Naomi kept singing, her voice steady, but each note felt like walking a rope stretched over fire. Silas watched everything from behind the bar. He saw the way men leaned forward, drawn to her voice not by desire alone but by something higher, something they didn't have words for. He also saw the way women whispered, clutching their shawls tighter, shaking their heads as if Naomi's song had poisoned the air. Every night ended the same. Naomi folded her wages into her small purse. Silas locked the till and the two of them walked out into the cool dark. He often trailed her at a distance, unseen, until she reached her door. He told himself it was only caution. Deep down, he knew better. One night, as she stepped out after a long set, Naomi found her father waiting in the shadows. His face was drawn, his eyes hard. "You still sing for them," Reverend Brooks said, his voice heavy with both sorrow and fury. Naomi froze, clutching her shawl tighter. "I told you, Father. It's for Mother. She needs—" "Do not speak her name in this matter," he snapped. "Your mother's suffering is not healed by shame. Do you think coins from a saloon will save her soul?" Naomi's voice trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. "It's not her soul I'm trying to save, it's her life. The medicine works? I've seen it. She's stronger now than she was a month ago." Her father's eyes flickered, torn between anger and the truth he couldn't ignore. But pride won out. "Even if the medicine helps, the cost is too high. You've made yourself a spectacle. You've dragged my name into the dust." Naomi's throat burned. "Would you rather she die with your pride intact? Is that the God you serve, Father?" The Reverend's hand shook as though he might strike her, but he lowered it with effort, his jaw tight. Without another word, he turned and strode away into the night. Naomi stood trembling, tears spilling onto her cheeks. Silas stepped from the shadows where he had been watching, his fists clenched. "He had no right to speak to you like that." "He's my father," Naomi whispered. "He has every right." Silas's voice hardened. "No father has the right to choose pride over his child's life." Naomi met his eyes, and for a heartbeat the silence between them carried more than words ever could. But she turned away before the moment could deepen, wiping her tears. "It doesn't matter. I'll keep singing. That's all I can do." The next evening trouble stirred again. A group of men, led by the fiery rival preacher, marched through town. They stopped outside the saloon, shouting loud enough for the whole street to hear. "This place is a pit of ruin," the young preacher cried. "And he, Silas Reed, profits from the fall of a woman meant for better things. Shame on him, shame on her, and shame on any who step through those doors." The crowd grew thick, their voices rising in anger. Naomi heard them even before she began her song. Her stomach knotted, but when the piano struck its first chord, she stepped forward and sang. Her voice wavered at the start, but soon it grew stronger, lifting above the shouts outside. Those inside fell silent, listening as if the world beyond the saloon walls no longer existed. When the last note faded, applause thundered. But the noise outside didn't stop. Silas's eyes darkened as he looked toward the swinging doors. He knew this was no longer just gossip. It was war. Naomi, breathless, glanced at him. "How long before they come in?" Silas wiped his hands on a rag, his voice steady as stone. "Not long now." The saloon was packed tighter than ever that night. Men filled every table, women sat along the walls pretending they were only passing through, and even the sheriff lingered near the door, chewing on a toothpick, his eyes sharp. Everyone knew something was coming. Naomi stood on stage, her hands clasped tight around the microphone stand. She could feel the air pressing heavily against her chest. The piano man gave her a nervous glance, but when Silas nodded from behind the bar, she drew in a breath and began to sing. Her voice rose above the clatter of glasses and the shuffle of boots filling every corner. For a brief moment, the room belonged to her, and even the loudest men fell still. But the peace was shattered with the sudden bang of the saloon doors. The rival preacher stormed inside, a group of townsfolk at his back. His eyes burned with fire as he pointed straight at Naomi. "There," he cried. "Do you see what shame looks like? The preacher's daughter reduced to a spectacle for sinners, and Silas Reed profiting from her fall." The room erupted in murmurs. Some men stood uncertain. Others crossed their arms, unwilling to be told what they should or shouldn't enjoy. Naomi's song faltered, her throat tightening. The rival preacher stepped closer, his voice loud enough to drown the silence. "Your father is disgraced. You should be at home tending your mother, not parading yourself before drunkards. You bring ruin to every man who listens." Naomi's hands shook. She wanted to run, to escape the heat of every eye fixed on her. But she thought of her mother's thin hand clutching hers, whispering not to let their tongues break her. And she stood tall. "I came here by choice," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "No one dragged me in. No one forced me to sing. I did it because my mother needed me, and I'll not be ashamed of saving her life." The rival preacher sneered. "Choice? You call this a choice? Your father's debts weigh on you like chains, and this man—" He jabbed a finger at Silas, tightened them so he could fill his pockets. The crowd shifted uneasily. Men glanced at Silas, suspicion stirring. Silas stepped out from behind the bar, his voice calm but sharp as steel. "Enough. You call yourself a man of God, yet you spit lies in a place where truth is plain. I didn't bring her here. She came on her own 2 feet. And she sings not for me but for herself, and for the mother you never mention in your sermons." The rival preacher's face reddened. "Lies! This salon is built on corruption, and she is the proof." Naomi's chest heaved, but before fear could crush her, she lifted her chin.
"If I am proof of anything," she said, her voice steady now, "it's that I will not hide behind pride while my family suffers."
"If helping my mother makes me fall, then I'd rather fall than be blind." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some men nodded. Even the sheriff's toothpick stilled as his eyes narrowed at the rival preacher. But the preacher wasn't finished. He raised his voice higher, desperate to win the crowd. "You all cheer her now, but wait until you see the truth. Her father, your own Reverend Brooks, owes more than any man here. His debts rot this town, and she sings to cover the shame." The words struck like gunfire. The crowd gasped. All eyes turned to Naomi. Her face went pale, her secret torn into the open. She gripped the stand tighter, fighting for breath as the weight of every stare bore down on her. Silas stepped forward, his voice low but firm. That's enough. You've said your piece, but if you think you'll break her with your poison, you don't know her strength. The rival preacher's lips curled into a smile, sensing victory. Naomi's secret was out. The town would never see her the same again. And Naomi, standing before them all, knew she had only one chance left to tell the whole truth, no matter the cost. The saloon was silent except for the creak of the floorboards under Naomi's feet. Her secret was no longer hers. The rival preacher's words hung in the smoky air, heavy as chains. Every eye was on her, waiting to see if she would deny it or crumble. Naomi's throat burned, but she drew in a deep breath. "It's true," she said, her voice trembling at first, then steadying. "My father owes more than he can ever repay. The debt is his, but I chose to bear it. I came here to earn the money he could not. I came here to keep my mother alive." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some men muttered in sympathy, others in scorn, but no one looked away. The rival preacher raised his arms as if he had won. "You see? Shame upon shame. The great Reverend Brooks cannot even provide for his family. And his daughter sells her voice to cover his disgrace." But Naomi lifted her chin, her eyes blazing. "Do not call it disgrace. I work with my own hands. I sing with my own voice. If sacrifice for family is shame, then I will carry it gladly. Better to be mocked for love than praised for pride." The words struck deep. Men shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, some looking away as if they had been rebuked themselves. Even the sheriff raised an eyebrow, chewing slowly on his toothpick. Silas stepped forward then, his voice low but cutting through the room. "You came here to drag her down, but all you've done is show her strength. She walks into fire every night while men like you throw stones from the shadows." The rival preacher's face flushed red. "And you, Silas Reed, you profit from her suffering. You're no better." Silas's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, Naomi spoke again. "No, he gave me work when no one else would. He didn't force me, and he doesn't own me. I came by my own will, and I'll keep singing by my own will." The rival preacher sneered, but his voice faltered. The crowd no longer looked at him with certainty. Some men muttered in agreement with Naomi. Others shook their heads, but fewer dared to speak against her. Then the saloon doors banged open again. Reverend Brooks himself stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. Whispers swept through the room as he stepped inside. His gaze fell on Naomi. "Daughter," he said, his voice raw. "Is it true?" Naomi's chest heaved, but she nodded. "Yes, Father. I knew of your debts. I took this work to pay them, to keep you standing, to keep Mother alive." The Reverend staggered, as if her words had struck harder than any blow. His pride, so heavy for so long, cracked in that moment. The rival preacher seized his chance. "You see? Even your daughter admits it. Your debts shame this town. You are unfit to lead." But the room no longer followed him. The sheriff stepped forward at last, his voice calm but firm. "Enough. A man's debts are his own business. And a daughter who carries them with her own labor. Well, I call that honor, not shame." Murmurs of agreement rose, louder this time. The rival preacher's fire sputtered. His words no longer carried weight. Reverend Brooks's eyes filled with tears as he looked at Naomi. For the first time, his voice broke not with anger, but with sorrow. "I was blind. I saw only disgrace where I should have seen courage." Naomi's lips trembled, but she held his gaze. "I only wanted to save her, and to save you even if you hated me for it." The Reverend bowed his head. "Forgive me, child." The room, tense and divided only moments before, softened. The rival preacher, beaten by the crowd's shift, stormed out in silence. And in that saloon, filled with the smoke of lamps and the echo of Naomi's truth, the tide had turned. The saloon stayed hushed even after the rival preacher stormed out. The weight of the showdown lingered like smoke that refused to clear. Naomi stood in the middle of it all, her hands trembling slightly at her sides, though her face held steady. Silas moved closer to her, his steps slow but sure. He didn't touch her, not yet, but he stood near enough that she felt his presence like a shield. His voice was gentle, meant for her ears, but still carrying through the room. You've done more than most men here would ever dare. Don't ever think you're less because of where you stand. Naomi swallowed hard. For a moment she couldn't trust her own voice. But when she spoke, it became clear. I only wanted to be free, Silas. Free to choose, free to help, free to live without shame chasing me. He nodded, eyes steady on her. And you are. Tonight you showed them all. Her father sank into a chair near the bar, his shoulders slumped as if years of weight had finally caught up with him. He looked like a man undone, stripped of pride and left only with his humanity. For the first time in Naomi's memory, the great Reverend Brooks seemed small, fragile even. A few townsfolk began to slip out, whispering among themselves. But their whispers no longer carried venom. Some even tipped their hats toward Naomi, a gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable only days before. The sheriff gave a small nod to Silas and left, as if to say, the matter's closed. Naomi turned toward her father. She wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but a part of her still feared rejection. Slowly he lifted his eyes to hers. His voice cracked, but there was no fire in it. Naomi, I see you now. Not as the world tells me to see you, but as my daughter. I should have trusted your heart. Tears blurred Naomi's vision. She knelt beside him, taking his calloused hand in hers. I never wanted to shame you, Father. I only wanted to save us. All of us. The Reverend nodded, his lips trembling. You saved more than you know. You saved me from my own pride. Silas turned away, giving them space. He leaned against the bar, arms folded, watching the room clear out. A strange peace settled over him. For years he had lived with a vow, a cold promise never to open his heart again. But seeing Naomi's courage, her defiance, her love, it cracked the walls he thought would never fall. When Naomi finally rose from her father's side, her eyes met Silas's. Something unspoken passed between them, steady and sure. She crossed the room, her steps quiet but filled with purpose. Thank you, she said softly, for standing with me when no one else would. He shook his head. You didn't need me to stand for you. You stood tall on your own. I only made sure they listened. For a moment she let a small smile touch her lips, weary but real. Still, I don't know if I could have faced them alone. Silas's gaze lingered on her, and the air between them felt heavier than any words. You were never alone, he said. The lamps flickered as the night deepened. Outside the town was quiet, but something had shifted. Naomi was no longer just the preacher's daughter. She was her own woman, and Silas, though he wouldn't yet say the words, knew his heart had already chosen. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like hope instead of sorrow. The next evening, the saloon filled once again, but the air was different, lighter, less poisoned by whispers. Folks came not out of curiosity or scandal, but to hear the voice that had shaken the town to its core. Naomi stood on the small stage, her dress plain but her presence radiant. She held herself with a calm she hadn't known when she first stepped through those swinging doors. The piano player gave her a nod and the music began, soft and steady. Her voice rose, clear, gentle, strong. It filled the saloon, reaching every corner, lifting every heart that listened. Even those who had once muttered against her now sat quietly, their faces softened by the sound. Silas stood at the back, arms folded, but his eyes never left her. For years the saloon had been a place of noise and distraction, a place where men came to forget, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like the heart of the town, and Naomi was the reason. At a corner table, Reverend Brooks sat with his hands clasped, his eyes lowered in prayer. When he looked up at his daughter, there was no judgment left, only pride and a tender sorrow for the years lost between them. Naomi finished the song, and for a moment, the saloon was silent. Then the room broke into applause, not rowdy or mocking, but genuine. She bowed her head slightly, humbled, and her eyes flicked to Silas. Their gazes held, and in that simple exchange something unspoken passed between them. A promise, not loud, not hurried, but sure. When the crowd began to settle, Silas walked forward. He didn't climb onto the stage, didn't make a grand show. He simply stood near enough for her to hear, his voice low. "You said you wanted freedom," he murmured. "Well, this is it. Not because you defied them, but because you chose for yourself. And if you'll let me, I'd like to stand with you in that freedom." Naomi's throat tightened. She saw the walls in him, the ones built from grief and vows never to love again, and now she saw them falling brick by brick until only the man remained, scarred but willing. She gave him a small smile, one that carried both relief and hope. "Then stay," she whispered. Silas's chest rose with a deep breath, as though he had finally set down a burden carried for too many years. For the first time he allowed himself to believe in tomorrow, not just for himself, but for both of them. The night carried on. The saloon bustled, laughter rising, glasses clinking. But for Silas, the noise faded into nothing. He watched Naomi step back onto the stage for another song, her voice lifting higher than before. She sang not as the preacher's daughter, not as a girl bound by the town's judgment, but as her own woman, free, fierce, and full of life. And Silas, standing in the glow of the lamps, felt the vow he once swore, never to love again, dissolve into the music. He didn't speak it aloud, but he knew. He loved her. And in her song she had already answered. The final image lingered. Naomi singing in the saloon, Silas watching with a quiet smile. Her freedom, his heart, and the town's respect, all bound together in the fragile, hopeful light of a new beginning. If you enjoyed this tale of love and redemption on the frontier, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Shadow Frontier Tales for more stories of the Wild West. Your support helps us keep these tales alive. See you in the next story.